Thank you, John. I always like to start off my story with, let's say hi to Malachi.
Hey, Malachi!
John and I were over in Ireland last month, and there was a New York contingent that went over, and we brought Malachi's ashes over to Dublin. And we went to see our friend David Gilner's play, and at the end of the show, they called Malachi's daughter Siobhan up, and she brought the ashes on the stage, and Malachi made his last appearance on the stage in Dublin. So that was a really poignant moment. I want to talk to you tonight and take you on a little journey in the radio car with me circa 1990 in the South Bronx. On that day, my regular partner was on vacation. So what happens in those times, they'll assign you to work with somebody new. Usually their partner's on vacation, so you're thrown into the radio car together. You only know each other just from passing each other by in the locker room, maybe, you know, having a beer after work, but you really don't know the person. So you have to understand the NYPD, because you're policing in a city of 8 million people, there's a lot of opportunity for temptation. Your badge gives you authority to meet people and go places that most of the public would never have access to. And to be exposed to situations where you have to wonder what you're really made of. If I ask this room to raise their hands and say, how many of you are honest people? Of course everybody would raise their hand. But it's always been my contention that you never really know if you're honest, if you have integrity, until the moment presents itself. Imagine yourself walking down the street and there's an elderly lady a few feet in front of you, and out from her pocketbook falls a $100 bill. What is your first and immediate reaction? Is it, excuse me ma'am, you dropped this? Or do you start to think about it and say, finders keepers, losers weepers? So you never really know what you're made of until the moment presents itself. I'm going to tell you a story exactly about those circumstances. We get in the radio car. The first call we get, a foul odor coming from an apartment. Now every cop knows what that means. Somebody's passed away in that apartment. This was a hot July day. We get to the place. It's one of those old dilapidated brownstones that had seen better days. And now they had divided up the rooms into little bedrooms. There were little hardware store locks on the doors. And there's a crowd of people that are gathered around the door, and we could smell it immediately. And if you've ever smelled the odor of a dead person, it never leaves you. It stays with you. So we broke down the door, and there it was. There was a man, looked like he had been dead for a few days, laying on the bed, living alone. And all the people outside were peering in as if they knew there was something valuable in there. And where are we going to find it? So, the job as a cop, in that situation when somebody lives alone, you have to do a certain procedure, a whole checklist. You have to search the apartment, bank books, jewelry, cash, ID, passports, And here's one that most cops fail on the sergeant's test. Numismatic coins. What's numismatic coins or currency? Those are collector coins or collector paper currency. You have to segregate that because that's not going to get deposited in the bank. So another part of the procedure is to call for the sergeant. The sergeant is supposed to supervise the search and then sign off on it, and then you take all that property that you found and you inventory it back in the precinct. So we rolled the man over and we searched his pockets. And this man was living a bare existence, and the odor was tremendous. Now I'm just going to give you a little inside baseball. Brian Davin over here will know exactly what I'm talking about. Even the poorest of people usually have ground coffee in their apartment. An old timer taught me this trick. He said, Al, go and turn the stove on and find a frying pan and get that frying pan hot as can be. Then you pour the ground coffee in there, and that releases the odor of roasted coffee. Now you can do your job, because that smell of the coffee will overcome the smell of that body that's rotting there. So that's what we did. And when we rolled the man over, in his pockets, in old plastic bags, that was stuffed with currency. We took that and put it on a table, this kitchen table, and took the currency out. You know what it was? It was silver certificates. That was money that was issued back in the 30s and the 20s and during the Depression. And then he also had some other money, and we're counting it on the table, and lo and behold, this is 1990. There was over $10,000 there. So the guy I'm working with, he says to me, Al, let's take it. He doesn't need it anymore. I pretended not to hear him. He said to me again, he goes, why take this money in and inventory it? It'll just go to the state of New York and they'll waste it. I pretended not to hear him again. Finally, he took the money and made two piles, roughly $5,000 each. And he held them up. And in one hand, he put it to me like this. In that moment, you find out what you're made of. Because that man lying there, he wouldn't bear witness to what this cop wanted to do. But I said to him, if you say it to me one more time, that is when I'm going to report you. He said, well, who's going to know? I said, I'm going to know. Do you think I want to worry about them knocking on my door at 4 a.m. 5 years down the road when you get in trouble for something else and they say to you, well, tell us what other cops are dishonest in order to save yourself? I said, I'm not living with that. Point of my story is, it's not to make me look good. The point of the story is, as human beings, we never know what we're made of until the moment presents itself. To wrap up the story, this guy wound up getting promoted to sergeant, wound up getting promoted to lieutenant, and one day I'm working a detail, And who is the lieutenant that's in charge of the detail? There's 50, 60 of us cops, and he's the lieutenant, and he's giving orders, and he sees me, and we lock eyes. And in that moment, he looked away from me. And why? Because he knew, I knew that he was a dishonest, not only person, but a dishonest New York City police officer. And he looked away from me and never looked at me again. This is what can happen on the job. We're not all perfect. And there's no way to tell if when that candidate gets offered the job, whether he's an honest person. But I say to myself, maybe I fell down a little bit myself in not reporting it. I do. I think that way sometimes. But he went on to become a leader of men, but in my eyes, he was never a leader of men. That's my story.
Thank you.